Good evening and welcome to Mindful Money Moment. My name is Kivette Minor Kane, and I'm here this evening with Heather D. Horton and Elizabeth Guthrie, who are going to be my guests for the evening. But you'll see them in just a few minutes when they're welcomed back in while I do a brief introduction. And I'm going to take a moment to share just a few thoughts with you guys about a Black woman in finance. So the reason that I'm here with Mindful Money Moment is because I guide women on their journey to self-sufficiency by teaching them how to manage their money without losing their minds. It is all about emotional intelligence and understanding how our emotional mental wellness affects our financial management. We have, many challenges that come up for us day to day, but being able to recognize how those challenges affect us emotionally through our thoughts and then through our actions will help us to understand how we're making the decisions that we are financially and how we can make the best decisions, not only for ourselves, but also for our families and for our community. So that is what Mari Moore Life Services, Mari Moore Life, a financial services agency, what we do. And you can reach me at www.marimorelife.com. You can visit my website. You can schedule time with me, connect with Kivette. I would love to have a connection with you so that we could talk more about, how to help you understand your emotions and your money management. And so tonight, I'm also going to take a moment to highlight a Black woman in finance. So each week, I'm highlighting a Black woman in finance. Last week, I highlighted Maggie Lena Walker, who was a historical figure for us. She, back in 1903, opened up the first Black-owned, woman-owned bank in the United States. So she was the first woman to open up or to be the president of a bank in the United States. And so that was absolutely phenomenal because she was a Black woman in that process to be the first woman. And so I'm very proud of her. She is one of my mentors. And I'm doing research and looking up, her past and understanding the pattern that she set and the example that she set for us. And so then tonight, I also have another figure who I'm going to identify, and that is Melody Hobson. So if you don't know Melody Hobson, you've got to look her up on Google. Okay, I'm just going to read what I found about her bio, and then I'll tell you a few things that I learned about her myself. First, Melody Hobson was born on April 3rd. I love her because she's an Aries. And she's age 51 now, but is an American businesswoman who is the president and co-CEO of Ariel Investments. Yes, she is an investment banker, but she's not just an investment banker. She is the co-CEO of this company, this Black-owned company. And she's also, as of December 2020, she was named the chairwoman of Starbucks Corporation. Now, this is not the first chairwoman position she's had for a major corporation, Fortune 500 corporation like this. She's also the former chairwoman of DreamWorks Animation, where I'm sure she met her husband, George Lucas. But she, having stepped down from that position after making sure that there was an acquisition, a major acquisition that went through between DreamWorks Animation SKG Inc. By NBC Universal. And that was in August of 2016. So in 2017, she became the first African-American woman to head the Economic Club of Chicago. And she was also named to the chair of Starbucks. And of course, that was this year in 2021. And she is the first African-American woman to hold that position. Now, this makes her also one of the highest profile African-American women or African-Americans, period, in corporate, as a corporate director. And on Forbes list, she's number 94. And what that means is on the world's list of 100 most powerful women, she ranks up there with the most powerful women, and obviously not at the bottom of that list. But looking at what she's accomplished, she's also the first Black woman to be the chairperson of an S&P 500 company. So all of these things, what does that mean? Okay, we're reading off a list of what her accomplishments are, and we're talking about, oh, she's the co-CEO and, she's the chairperson for this major film corporation, or she's the chairperson for this major coffee company, and she's on the Forbes list. All of this means that she is a major role model for our community. And I want to highlight her because I believe that as a young Black woman, we should have role models to look up to who project dignity, and who project integrity, and who project sophistication. And when we think about, what do our little girls in our neighborhoods, who are they looking up to as their role models? Who is the person that is right in front of them and they're saying that this is a role model? What I've seen projected as role models in our community is unacceptable to me. It's unsatisfactory. These entertainers who are out here, displaying their bodies all over the place and, talking about things that little girls should not even hear about at their young, vital ages. We want to be able to put someone in front of them who is going to give them a positive role model to look up to. And so Mellody Hobson is absolutely that. She's my shero. Definitely one of my mentors, and certainly a role model for me even today. And if I had a daughter, she would definitely be a role model for her. So if your little girl doesn't know Mellody Hobson's name, you need to make sure that she figures out who that woman is, does some research on Google, and does a personal private report for you, Mom, so that she can identify who Mellody Hobson is, what Mellody did to get to where she is, and how she can follow in Mellody's footsteps. So with that, I'm going to bring in two other role models for our young ladies. Thank you. Happy National Business Women's Day. It is International Women's Day, and we're also celebrating Women's History Month here in the U.S., and so, it is all about women. Now, I'm celebrating women here every day on at Mari More Life, my company, but then also here on Mindful Money Moments. We celebrate women every week. So thank you, ladies, for joining me. Thank you for being here to share your information, your stories, as well as tips on how we're able to improve on our emotional management and our money management. Okay. So first, Heather D. Horton is a grief and well-being coach for lawyers. She empowers lawyers and law students to identify the root cause of their personal and professional challenges and learn how to manage their emotions. The result of responding versus reacting to life events and circumstances. Heather also works with law firms to create cultures of well-being. Absolutely. So Heather is the founder of the H Squared Group, LLC, a location independent grief recovery coaching and support practice. She is also an advanced grief recovery method specialist, IFC accredited coach, a certified professional diversity coach, and certified emotions mentor. So thank you so much, Heather, for joining us. So in your line of work, you're actually working with attorneys to help them to deal with grief. Where would you start with that?
Well, I would start with defining what grief is, because it's really not what we think it is. Most people think it's just death, but grief is the change or loss of anything. I'll just say that. It is the change or loss of anything. So anything we lose or anything that changes, we experience grief around it. Most people want to say trauma. Trauma is the event. Grief is the feelings that are left over.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can relate to that. I've spoken to my audience on previous lives about my personal story. So understanding that within less than 3 years, I experienced 3 major traumas. First was surviving Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And then came a few months later, the death of my father, who passed here in the U.S. with no will and no life insurance. So that was a double trauma. In that sense. And then not long after that, the ensuing separation and divorce from my marriage. So with women who have experienced those kinds of traumas, what is the first step that you would recommend they take in managing their grief?
Acknowledge what has happened. Don't suppress those feelings. Actually feel those feelings. A lot of times we're like, oh, that's not going to keep me down. I'm just going to keep going. But what I want to express is what we resist persists.
Yeah.
So if you don't deal with it now, it's going to come back, and it can come back with a vengeance and not only affect you, but everybody that's in your circle of influence, and especially our children. But learn how to manage those emotions and process and feel what you're feeling in the moment, not later, but in the moment.
We see grief expressed in a lot of different ways. Many times people will only think that grief is expressed in sadness. But what are the other emotions that are found to express grief?
Anger. It's easier for us to get angry than to actually do something. That's a huge one. And that was a huge barrier for me when my parents divorced. I carried anger a very long time. And in a lot of other situations that changed, or that things that I lost. But that anger piece, it's just so easy to go there and not deal with it. Just put up a wall. But the bigger piece is for us to actually process it. Like, what happened? Feel the good parts, feel the bad parts. Because most of the time, naturally, what we do is just feel the bad parts. We don't want to look at, well, what good came out of this?
Yeah.
It's got to be a balance. It can't be bedevilment or enshrinement. It can't be looking at all the positives or looking at all the negatives. It's got to be a balanced perspective in order for you to move forward in the most healthy way.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about that process, a lot of times we'll maybe feel that we need to go and see, a therapist. And getting therapy is absolutely a beneficial thing to be able to have someone to talk to. But then there's other steps that individuals can take in addition to the therapy, which can benefit them on their own. Are there any suggestions that you would take? I'm a big person, or big proponent for not just what to do, but how.
Yes, and I'm biased, but I would say go through the grief recovery method. I'm a grief recovery specialist that can take you through that program. And I'm going to tell you, I've been through therapy, but this is better than therapy. Because as you said, you want to know how. I actually model for you how to go through the steps. You're not doing anything that I'm not doing first for you. And you're never going to go to a therapist and have them open up their lives and share with you what has happened and how they have moved forward. So that is what I deem as the great difference or the uniqueness of what the grief recovery method is. It's not covered by insurance, and people are like, well, I have insurance and I can go to a therapist. But if I told you I could give you your life back for $1,000, I mean, I'm just throwing out a number. If I asked you for $1,000 and I said I could give you your life back, is that worth more to you than whether or not you have insurance?
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to recognize, the signs and to be conscious of them. So the question was asked, why are people angry or why are they expressing anger when they're feeling grief? We understand the tears because of the sadness, but why is anger an emotion that comes out so much?
Well, I can talk about me. I think anger comes out for a lot of people, again, because it's the natural thing. We have to, even to laugh, we have to actually it has to be some action there.
Yeah.
Our normal inclination is just to be upset because we didn't get our way.
Yeah.
And that's where the anger comes in. For me, I just didn't feel like things didn't go the way that I wanted them to go. And so, the most natural thing was for me to just put up a wall and stop talking to my dad or whomever. And I will say this, if you don't really process, and this might be a little off topic, but if you don't process your key relationships, meaning your familial and your paternal relationships, that follows you into your adulthood.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because between 2 and 3, we develop most of our coping mechanisms. Our default coping mechanisms happen between the ages of 2 and 3. When we're not talking, but we are observing those who are around us. That's 75% between the ages of 2 and 3. And by the time we're 15, 95% of our default coping mechanisms are set in stone, unless we do something intentionally different to learn how to manage our emotions. And so a lot of us, when things happen, when things change or when we lose things, we are acting out like children, even though we are rational adults with degrees and, all these letters behind our name. But because we don't know how to manage our emotions when things happen that we don't like, we go to anger. We go to substances, drugs, alcohol. We go to pornography or sex, buying too much, social media.
Therapy is a big deal. I work with that all the time. And I talk about that with my clients on a regular basis because it is an outlet. And so even to talk more about that release of anger, it comes from the frustration of not being in control of the situation.
Exactly.
And I know even for myself, anger is a big expression of that frustration. And during my grieving period, it was major for me. I had one friend who was very close to me and, received, I would say, the brunt of that, but was very patient with me in that process and understanding that I was not angry at them in particular, but that I was just angry over the circumstances, and being able to express that and with their patience allowed me to work through it. But then I also had to take some time alone. A big tool for me is my journaling. Writing out those feelings. So you talk about processing our childhood relationships and things like that. The way that we're able to process oftentimes is because we have these thoughts caught in our head. If we take them and we can put them down on paper and read them outside of ourselves, then we're able to put it into perspective. And then maybe we can share that with a friend or with our therapist if, we have someone, and coming to, of course, for you, for the grief recovery situation. And so we're able to now express that with someone and to receive some feedback. So we're not just caught in our own mindset. We're not just caught in our own thoughts over it.
Yeah. And the thing is there's no feedback. It's just you getting it out of the body. Because if it stays in the body, then it can cause disease. It can cause all types of illness. But you gotta say it out of your mouth. Writing is great because we do writing in the process. But giving it to someone who is going to hear you with no judgment, no criticism, no analysis, they're not going to stop you. It's just you sharing exactly how you feel. And most times you can't find anybody who's going to do just that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so when you talk about how those feelings, if we don't let them out, how they can affect us physically, because I deal with 5 areas of mindset, recognizing that, all these 5 areas are so focal for us in being able to manage our thinking and our thoughts, our mental, which obviously is our direct thoughts, which affect our emotions, which are our feelings. Understanding how we are affected spiritually as well as physically, which is what you're talking about, and then also financially. The physical part, I think, is huge when you're talking about grief too, because what I find is one of the major symptoms is people will often forget to eat or hydrate during a time of grief. Yes,
that is one of what I would call, or the grief recovery method calls, it's a short-term energy relieving behavior. We don't want to feel, or we want to avoid feeling. We seek other things to give us comfort, which could be food or not food, or too much sleeping or not enough sleeping. And that's where we really put ourselves in a bind, because if you're doing those things, if you're giving yourself short-term relief, any of those things that I mentioned, they are not in and of themselves bad, but when they're prolonged, they can cause long-term damage. And so we got to notice when we're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oftentimes you'll hear people say that, it just, in time you'll get over it.
Oh,
what do you say about that?
Time without action does nothing.
Absolutely.
People wait around 10, 20, 30, 40 years for time to change things. And if you don't take one step every day, you're going to be in the same place with the same pain, and it's going to accumulate because, as I said at the beginning, change happens every day. We just don't label it as that. And so if you don't process what's happening, things continue and it becomes cumulative, and it can become cumulatively negative and ultimately be your demise.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to talk a little bit more now about the financial side of things. And we're going to look at credit and how our finances can affect our emotions and our grieving process, as Heather was sharing with us here. We're going to turn to Elizabeth Guthrie, who is a great friend of mine and
Hey.
who is a credit repair specialist. Elizabeth Guthrie is the founder and financial wellness consultant for EAG Credit Solutions. Ms. Guthrie has more than 2 decades of human resource experience. She focuses on helping individuals and employees build their legacies by educating them on repairing, maintaining, and protecting their credit. Ms. Guthrie offers valuable services to obtain wellness through a holistic approach through financial coaching, workshops, and various financial tools. Throughout Ms. Guthrie's career, she has witnessed people of all levels struggle with financial wellness. She believes that achieving an abundant mindset is possible if one is willing to make a concerted effort. And that is absolutely what we were just talking about, making a concerted effort to make the adjustments. So what is your recommendation, Liz, when you meet someone who is first, dealing with a financial crisis in terms of their credit? What would you first look at with them or examine with them?
Okay, so what I'd like to say about that is that all of those emotions that Sister just talked about it is so true, it's so valid, and it pertains to credit and financial wellness as well. But what I really like to focus on is the preparation. And so when you are dealing with a crisis, the last thing you want is to be dealing with the court system, dealing with probate court, dealing with family members, and so if I could talk about a few things that I would recommend to my clients prior to a grievance situation, and what it is to protect your credit and to protect your whole financial wellness situation. And the first thing I like to say is even when I'd like to recommend the beginning. But if you don't, the first thing I like to say is we have to really take inventory of everything that impacts us financially. And this is best done before, because if you're not in the right state of mind, being taken advantage of while you are grieving is the absolute worst, because Ms. Horton did say that if you don't take that one step at a time, you still will be in that same situation. And so I know it's a little odd, but the first thing I tell people before that process happens, take an inventory. Now for insurance purposes, they tell you to make videos. And you might not think you need a will, but God knows you do need a will. Because what if you have small children and you need to protect them? That is definitely a financial wellness situation. And if they're not protected, and you need a trust, because a trust will ensure that your business is handled the way you want to handle. And we all hear about the stars passing away with no will and no trust. They have tons and tons of money.
Yeah.
And so if you want to protect your credit, make sure you have a will and trust. Because did you know? Now you got to be careful because every state is different. In Pennsylvania, the inheritance tax is 4.5%. Who has 4.5% of a $200,000 house in their pocket? I don't. Chances are my children won't. So maybe they will, but maybe they won't. But it's up to us to protect our financial well-being by just taking care of these small things. And it's really important because and Ms. Horton talked about financial retail therapy. Absolutely worst thing to do. You have other things that count, but again, that is your coping mechanism. And if you have some of these things in place, if you want to do retail therapy, you're good. You're not ruining things. You're not making things worse. And Another recommendation, I always, no matter what situation you're in, grieving or no matter what loss, it will be compounded if you do not have your business in order. I
Mhm.
know that a lot of people, at least at my age, we remember taking a little key, going to the bank, going to the vault. You have your jewelry, you have your watches, you have your
Safe deposit
bonds.
box.
Yes, but I say that, and kids is like, "What?
I know
What's
they
that?
have no
I don't
idea
know
these
what that
what
is."
that stuff
Right.
looks like. Absolutely.
Exactly. That's called putting your business in order. And so
Yeah.
you may not have that will, you may not have that trust, but it's a really, really good idea to put everything in one spot. Because maybe you may or may not um, have a financial planner,
Yeah.
but
But if
those are
you got
things that I
super
recommended.
valuable items. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And going back to the box, so nowadays you have an online version that if something should happen to you, it's connected to the county where you live. And if you should pass, you don't have to deal with the grieving family members. And we all know when we all get together and there's cussing and fussing and carrying on because what are we? We're angry. We're very, very angry. And that is the first thing that I see. People are saying things that they can't take back. So it's really important that I recommend to my clients get, even if it's online, you need to have the deed to your house, the title to your car, if you have a coin collection. And you need to have those things all in order. That's really
Yeah.
important because
Right. So
you got
so
to
we've
have
talked
those
about a
things in
few.
order.
Yeah, so
Go
we've
ahead.
talked
I'm
about
sorry.
a few things here. We've talked about being able to get our estate plans together and how we can organize our possessions for the time when we pass, because we're talking about grief during a time of loss in terms of death when there's a life lost. But we're also talking about grief from times such as, you know, when you're dealing with things like natural disasters, or if you're dealing with a separation or a divorce, similar to what I have experienced in the past.
Mhm.
And so we think about, you know, what does it mean for us? How are those things going to affect our credit? You know, and how would that, you know, come as a mark for us? And how would it be challenging for us to focus in on caring for those things? And one reason that I pose that question is because I know in our community, a lot of times you talk to people and they're just like, well, you know, I ain't worried about my credit because, you know, nobody can get anything with my credit score.
Right.
You know,
And
and we laugh about it, but it's really not anything. It's not funny. You know,
right.
that's not
It's
laughable.
not.
It's
It's not
sad
funny.
that we put ourselves in that position, you know, to feel
Right.
like we don't have anything to lose, you
Right.
know?
Right. Right. And and if you don't think about and a lot of us don't, but now there's so much a wealth of financial literacy education
Mhm.
out there. And so we should have some kind of clue about what we need to do because just lost everywhere. You lose a job. Like for instance, I had
Well,
a
we're
client that
talking about,
lost.
first of all, let me just say something here. We're
Okay.
talking to folks who don't have a clue. We're not going
Okay.
to assume that they should, because
Okay.
we're not going to should on anybody here.
Sure. Sure.
This is a no judgment zone. And I would tell you that
Sure.
I know for myself at the age of 43, when I returned to the United States after I lived out of the country for 5 years, I had nothing, absolutely
Okay.
nothing to my name, no retirement. My credit was, you know, 500 score, you know, which was absolutely reprehensible. And I had no worldly possessions. I mean, I literally off the plane with the bags and the clothes I had on my back. You know, so when we're talking about people having a traumatic transition, sometimes
Okay.
when women are leaving their families because they have separation or divorce, and you're familiar with this, is they don't have anything with them. You know, they may not
Sure.
even have a bank account.
That's
You know,
correct.
so how can we encourage them about their credit at a time like that? Like, why would you even want to think about your credit as the first step to rebuilding your life from that point?
Okay. So a lot of our clients and friends and people I know, they don't have good credit. But the point is, it's something we should think about because you may need to leverage it. So if you first thing you have to have income. I mean, that's step one. You have to have income, and you have to work with what you have. And it's not easy, and sometimes you don't have enough to go around, but you can do your very, very best and prioritize.
Hmm.
Even if you have very, very little, you can't build your credit. You have to have income. You cannot do it accidentally. You can't do it without the income. So you just have to make your priorities. You food, of course, and shelter is number one. And after that, you have to pay what you can. And so it's
Right.
really,
So they've
really
got their income together and they're rebuilding themselves slowly but surely. Now, when we talk about their credit, why is that something that they should focus on? Rebuilding from that ground layer. I mean, before
because
it
first of
even
all,
have, any other financial things in place, they want to be concerned about their credit. Maybe getting a checking account would be a good step to helping them build their credit, right? How is the
well,
checking account going to help them with
yes,
that?
they can get a checking account. They can do that. They can, and it's hard. What if you're in a natural disaster? That's really, really hard. So if we're talking about that level of credit building, there are just things that you do. You can go to the bank, and so moving beyond the natural disaster. What if you have a loss of a spouse?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the
Mm-hmm.
first thing you could do is go to the bank, establish your own line of credit, because you can't spend on his credit worthiness. You have to be able to build that for yourself. And so there's so many things that banks can do is, you can, if you have a job, you can open up a checking account, and you can put money aside, a savings account, and there is products that you can use to build credit. For instance, you can open up a secured credit card, and
Ah, okay.
yeah.
That's a
So
really
let's
good.
say
Now, let me ask you this. Do they have to have a job in order to get a checking account?
you have to have income.
Okay,
You
but
have
do
to
they
you have
have,
to you have to have income.
but they just have to have income. So that's it. Not
Right.
necessarily even that they have a job, because we know that some women, when they're in these situations, they're not able to work a job, but they're able to have income because they
That's
receive
correct.
either a stipend or a monthly amount from some other resource
That's
that
correct.
they're able to account for as their monthly income. And so
And maybe
whatever
they
that
can't
income
deposit
is,
and maybe they can't deposit $500, but maybe they
right?
can have $100.
How
So
much do
that
they need to start an account?
every banking institution is different. I always
Mhm.
like to recommend credit unions.
Yes.
They're local, they're fair, you invest in them and they invest in the community. So that's where I like to send them first. And I remember a friend of mine, her mom was a stay-at-home mom. And what happened was when the dad passed, mom didn't know anything about how to pay the light bill, how to pay all these different bills. And so she lived a very comfortable life because he was a, middle class worker, and she stayed at home. But so those are some of the things that we don't think that it's grief when we lose our job. And it is. You can get depressed. So when I talk to clients, and first thing they said, I've lost my job. I said, stay focused on your credit. Why? Because if you don't stay focused and you miss a payment, then your credit situation gets worse. And then that's the depression, and then it's the sadness, and next thing you know, you're angry and you're saying things that you
Yeah.
shouldn't say. So it's a really vicious cycle. So, when we're talking about building a credit, the biggest advice I can say is stay focused. And you may not have a lot, but whatever you have, make a decision to do the best you can. And credit is just a snapshot. It
Yeah.
may be 525 this right now, but you talking about lifting your spirits when it becomes 625 and then 700, stay on it. Stay on
Yeah.
it. And that's the best I can recommend. Doesn't matter what type of grief they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Stay focused, and don't worry about what you don't have.
Right.
That will come because credit is all about building and leveraging.
Yeah. So when we think about a time like this, when people are going through a pandemic, and this is a natural disaster, even though we don't have the physical, results of, maybe the trees coming down or the house being damaged, this is still a natural disaster for us. It deals with our health and people are being affected. Our jobs have been affected. Our economy has been affected, and as we're looking at these things continue to unfold over the next few years, because this is not just something that's going to be cured overnight, then what we need to recognize is the coping mechanisms. And that's where our grief recovery comes into play. That's where it's important for us to pay attention to our credit, because credit is a serious resource. When we have an emergency, if we got a credit card that we can use in that emergency, then that's a resource that can provide relief for us. If we have credit that's decent enough for us, if we, want to go and purchase a home, like right now, having good credit would be absolutely fabulous for anybody, because the home prices are so low. The loan rates are so significantly low that, it makes it cheaper to buy a house than it does to rent.
It's a buyer's market.
Exactly. So if you've got a decent credit rating, then you can qualify for the things that you need, not just the extra stuff. Because a lot of times we think credit is just for extra, but credit is a resource even for our necessities. Yes. And so when we look at it as a critical point for us, then just like you said, when we have a grievous situation, we want to pay attention to not allowing our finances to just go off to the wayside, because then that causes a double tragedy for us.
Absolutely. And can I say one more thing just to add on to that? A lot of times when we're grieving, sometimes we're grieving about the situation that our finances in. And so again, that takes a little bit of paying attention and demanding and saying to yourself, I will not let this get the best of me. But I'm saying to say that is that sometimes people, when they grieve and they think it's all over, and it's not. And let me just give you an example, and it may not be related directly to grieving, but did you know the U.S. Treasury has $70 billion of our assets? Because people do not communicate with their loved ones, with their insurance policies. And so I remember last year I went into the Treasury and I'm like, oh, I got $775. You know what that was? I left my 401k at some job when I was 17 years old, and it was only 300 then. Now it's 700. But these are things that we have to think about, and we have to just pay attention. Just pay attention. So when we are going through this horrible process, I think, and maybe you could help me out with this, that we have to go backwards. Once it's all over, once we think it's all over, I think it's important to go back to see what we missed.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to backtrack sometimes, but then it's also important for us to know that we have someone who can advise us through that process. So just like when we're dealing with an emotional or mental stressing situation, we go to therapists, or we find Heather, who would be our grief recovery specialist. Then we also want to be able to be in contact with a financial advisor.
Yes.
I look at financial advisors very much like doctors and attorneys.
Yes.
They are the ones that are there to help you to manage your money, and your money is directly linked to your lifeline.
Absolutely.
We talk about how health is wealth. It's because those who are wealthy can afford to be healthy. They can afford healthier foods. Yes. They can afford better medical care. They can afford better living conditions. So quality of life is improved. And so if we want to improve our quality of life, we also have to be conscientious about our money and being able to see a financial advisor on a regular basis. Now, most people would plan to see their doctor every year on their birthday because they're going for an annual checkup. And there may not necessarily be anything wrong, but they're going in just to make sure that everything is okay.
Absolutely.
And so it's the same thing with a financial advisor. They can come to us in order to just check and make sure that everything is okay. We've got 5 areas that will help you to review. And because you've got a professional who is emotionally separated from your circumstance, You've got a fresh set of eyes for someone who can assist you through the process. If there is something wrong, we can identify it and then help you with a solution to repair it or fix it. And so Liz would be the person to come in with that credit repair, that cape on. She's going to come and save the day with her credit superpowers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And be able to make a complete turnaround.
Absolutely.
So there's another situation we were talking about earlier, ladies, and I want to bring this up because I think it's something that a lot of people deal with in relation to grief, just like you were saying before, Heather. And that is just on the opposite end. Sometimes we're talking about grief in terms of losing money, or in terms of losing our material possessions, or losing a person. But then there's also a kind of grief that comes in with an influx. Yeah. So how do we identify that, Heather?
Well, it's just like, imagine someone winning the lottery. If you didn't know how to manage money before then, you've got an even larger responsibility now, and it can cause anxiety because you don't know what to do with it, or you can start spending it and then you're like, you see the amount reducing, and so again, it creates anxiety. You don't know how you're going to keep it, but you don't know what to spend it on either.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sets in panic. Okay, so I can raise my hand to that, but I've been there.
I call those people poor rich people, because they got the money and they never learned about financial literacy. It's really important. And it's not just
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's not just paying down debt. So people like me, so we work on the debt. So you increase your score. So that means you're rebuilding or repairing, but you have to maintain it. And oh, wait a minute, you got to protect it, because what happens if somebody steals it?
Yep.
Okay. Absolutely. Because nobody's interested in stealing anything from somebody with a 350 credit score. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
So you're safe. You're pretty safe.
Right, but that's where people get comfortable. They think, oh, nobody can take anything from me because I don't have it. But the whole idea is not to stay low in hiding, like you want to stay at the bottom of the rung because nobody wants to take anything from you. It's you want to be able to build yourself up so that you have a decent quality of life, so that you have the peace of mind in knowing that you have enough, and that you're leaving something behind for your family aside from a legacy of debt. One thing that was surprising for me when my father passed away, I didn't know we had to pay taxes after we die.
Inheritance tax. And let me help you with that. So it's 4.5% inheritance tax when you want to transfer real estate. It's 0 from the living spouse. It's 12 or 15% if you want to pass it on to a sibling, and there's a lot more if you want to pass it on to somebody else. So that's why it's important to have a trust. And not just that, what if somebody come out of woodwork and say, hey, Mr. Joe was my daddy too? So now we're in probate court. So not just building your credit, not just winning the lottery, you have to understand the financial literacy part of knowing how money operates. And credit is a huge beginning. Financial literacy, learning to prepare and to maintain and protect your credit is a huge advantage. And no matter what type of loss we're talking about.
Yeah. And that maintenance piece comes from knowing how to manage our emotions. If you don't know how to manage your emotions, then that's when you start spending or hoarding or what have you. And hoarding. So, again, it doesn't matter what type of grief. Grief is loss of change or any kind. So we don't need to put an adjective in front of grief. We just need to identify and notice that anytime anything changes or we lose something, process emotions. And there's a question there.
There's a question there from Donnie. He says, what signs tell us that grief is ending? How do we know when we have worked through that grieving process?
Well, again, as I said, grief happens every day, but we gotta notice that it's happened. So much happens and we just suppress, we just keep moving. You gotta actually be in the present and notice what's happening in every moment of your life. Yeah. And when you do that, then you gotta take time to process. people don't want to do that because we're impatient. We want to just keep moving forward. And
some of them can't afford to do it, Heather.
Yeah.
Some of them don't have time to, because they got to go back to work, and grieving actually takes time.
I agree, but it takes time with action. And most people aren't taking action. They're just waiting.
Yeah.
They're not paying attention.
No,
they're just not paying attention.
And you've got to take that time to notice, because if you don't, then you're going to make another bad decision, which is going to just continue to be cyclical, and you're never going to get out of that. And a lot of this is generational. And at some point, one person has to decide that the next generation is not going to live like our family did in the past.
Right.
And do something different. But again, you've got to take that time, because, as I said earlier, what you resist persists. If you don't process it, it's going to come back, and it may come back with a vengeance.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to be conscious first of what we're going through. And that means paying attention to the events that are going on in our lives, and not just saying, oh, so-and-so happened, this and that happened, and keep on moving. It's, this happened, and how do I feel about it?
Right. And
so how am I reacting? If there are people in your life who notice that your attitude has changed or your behavior has changed, are they bringing it to your attention? How significant is that?
They can bring it to your attention, but if you're not ready to receive that,
right?
So again, we individually have to notice what's going on within ourselves, so that when we respond or react, it's empowering others in addition to empowering ourselves. And to answer the question, how do we know grief is ending? When something happens and you actually notice it immediately and you process it, that's when you know it's ending. It doesn't trigger you anymore. Yeah. Or if it does trigger you, you're like, okay, what is this? Why am I feeling this way? And then you move forward.
Okay, so you just introduced a new term. You said trigger. There may be some folks out here thinking you talk about somebody with a gun. Hold on.
Oh, no. It can feel like that, but no.
So what do you mean when you talk about triggers?
For example, when something, I'm just going to say this, takes you to the left, or, you just act out totally, you need to notice that, because something tripped you off. You may not realize what it was, but literally, like if you're here 1 minute and then you're like at 100 the next second.
So we can say that being triggered means you've got an excessive emotional response.
Yeah, something not right.
Yeah,
and you figure out why or where that started, because it may not have started in that moment. It may have started in your childhood.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. Because if you process it, it's still going to be there later on in life.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that about the childhood, because recently, so my mother and I are estranged. We are
estranged.
Thank you. Easy for you to say. So, thank you. And so I haven't spoken to her in a while. And then so my daughter was telling my niece, Mom's happy, she's fine. And I noticed that every time I talk to my sister, I'm triggered. I feel that loss of not being able to speak to her. And, I don't feel a sadness that I don't speak to her, because through my childhood, I just got used to it. And that was just my personal situation. But I just realized at this age, 60 years old, I'm just now realizing every time I talk to my sister, she triggers me by telling me whatever she needs to tell me about my mom. And then I'm sad for like a week. And I thought, what's going on with that? So I just realized, somebody said every family has one. But I recently told her, and I felt better. She said, well, I didn't mean it. I said, because she would say, my mom. I'm like, your mom got 7 kids. Right. It's my mom too. So when she said that, that triggered me to make me think that, okay, I'm happy. I'm content with my life, but I'm only reminded of what makes me unhappy when I talk to this particular sister. So I think it's important to know what those triggers are.
Absolutely. We have to identify them.
Right. And I would say that's not just grief. I'm going to put an adjective in front of it. It's unresolved grief. because every time that happens, and that's what's happening. We're walking around with so much unresolved grief.
Yeah.
And we can't wait until the next time we're triggered.
Yeah.
We've got to process what happened from the past. So to process what comes up, because as long as we're living and breathing, change and loss and grief are going to be part of this world.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so can we give people permission to recognize within themselves that there are some things that you're just not going to get over?
Yeah.
I lost my grandmother when I was 14. No, I mean, honestly, I lost my grandmother when I was 14 years old. And there are still moments when I maybe have a thought or something that triggers my remembrance of her and feeling of loss, and so I feel like I have dealt with that grief. I've been to therapy for it. I've talked to a couple of different therapists about it, and worked through that process. But for us as humans, because we do have such a deep connection with some individuals, in our lives, and the way that they affect us, the way that we were groomed or nurtured by them, that we can still continue to feel that loss. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's just recognizing that it's there and being able to cope with the emotion so that we can take the time, as you said, take the time out to deal with it, and then continue to move forward, to be kind to ourselves and be gracious, so that we're not just saying, oh, I shouldn't be feeling that after, 20 or 30 years, let me just move through it. And then at the grocery store cursing out the cashier lady.
Right. We've got to be comfortable with crying. Crying is not a bad thing.
Yes.
But we also, when we've worked through and processed our emotions, when we work through our grief and process our emotions, then we can, like, for instance, what you said with your grandmother, when that comes up, maybe it's not as painful as it used to be, but you're able to remember the memories. That's what grief recovery is about. It's not about you forgetting or letting go of that person because you love them. That's why you're grieving. Right. But the thing is not being painful when you remember that. And if it's painful when you remember, then you've got some unresolved stuff there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so thank you, ladies, so much for sharing this information with us, helping us to understand, the process of going through grief and being able to, first of all, identify what grief is for us. Because, as you said, we deal with grievous situations every day. How are we processing that? First, we've got to be conscious of it. So my recommendation is get a journal. Write down for 5 minutes a day, either at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, what you experienced and what, emotions you might be carrying around with you, based on the experience from that day. And then take a moment as well to write out 3 things that you're grateful for that day, because gratitude shifts your attitude in a whole nother positive direction.
Sure.
We can talk about what we're grateful for, then it puts us in a much more humble position. And that will relieve some of the anger as well as some of the sadness, and having positive memories about our loved ones that we've lost, maybe even about the material things that we've lost, whether it be by natural disaster, whether it be by financial disaster, because sometimes, people have lost material possessions, meaningful material possessions, because they've been evicted.
Sure.
Or, because they had to flee a situation, maybe because of abuse, and they weren't able to hold on to everything. So you think about, when people say, well, if there was a fire, what are the things that you would hold on to? Keeping those things close to you. Sometimes you can't even get that.
That's right.
But what people can never take from you is the memories that you have.
Yes.
You can write down those memories and hold on to the happiness, the love, and the peace that you had in those situations and circumstances. And you can find yourself a much better person for having done that. So then in the process of building your credit, I know for myself and a few things that you mentioned, Liz, were that we could, first of all, pay attention to our credit, know what's wrong with our credit. We can take steps to contact those credit bureau agencies if we find wrong information on our credit report.
Dispute them.
Right into them, and then dispute those wrong reports. And also getting a secure credit card, you said.
That helps.
To get a secure card, even though we may not qualify for an out and out, credit card, that will help us to rebuild our credit. And I will speak for my own situation. It took me only in less than 6 months, I was able to increase my credit score by 200 points using a secure credit card. And that was for me, I was surprised, but it was because I was paying attention to it. There were a few tips that a really good friend gave me, and I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But putting those practices into action made all the difference. You know, and it's putting me in a position where within just 2 years, I'm looking at buying a house. You know, and something that most people say, oh, you're not going to be able to do that. You know, you had absolutely nothing. You know, what are you doing? You know, how are you going to be able to afford that? Well, I'm looking at the fact that I am able to afford renting.
Yes.
If I can rent, I can buy.
Absolutely.
You know, and so we as a community have to really think about what is the position that we're putting ourselves in to be able to elevate. To have a higher quality of life, and then to be able to support others in our community. Because a lot of times what we find is those in our community are renting from those outside of our community who don't care about their quality of life.
Yeah.
Did you hear that? Those outside of our community who do not care about our quality of life. But if we're renting from those inside of our community, then we're hoping, we can't say everybody in our community, you know, even that's not a blanket statement, but we're hoping that there would be at least more concern there for being able to recognize and to relate, you know, in the circumstances and the situation, to recognize that everybody deserves to have a decent standard of living, you know, a quality of life, and that we can work together to provide that, whether you are renting or you're buying.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to talk more about that on my next show. I'm going to have a friend of mine who is a realtor is going to be visiting with us. We will also have some interesting surprises for you on the next Mindful Money Moment. I will be talking about some upcoming gifts and treats and surprises and promotions that I will be doing, as well as, being able to share some information with you guys about how you can make those changes, what to do, and how to take those actions that are necessary. So I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. How can folks get in contact with you, Heather, if they're interested in, following through with your grief recovery solutions?
Yes, they can reach out to me at heatherdhorton.com. Don't forget the D. heatherdhorton.com, and I'm also on Instagram at heatherdhorton.com, and also on LinkedIn. Same thing, heatherdhorton.com.
Absolutely. And so for credit repair and recovery, Liz, how can they reach out to you so that they can go ahead and take those initial steps to first pay attention to their credit and then get fixed?
Yes. So you can go to my website, eagcreditsolutions.com, or you can email me at liz@eagcreditsolutions.com, or you can contact me at 717-715-3979, and I will get back to you with a plan.
Awesome. Absolutely. And so you guys know that you can reach me here every Monday evening at 7 p.m. It's a Mindful Money Moment. I am Kivette Minor-Kane, your financial liberation expert with Mari Moore Life LLC, a financial services agency. You can reach me at marimoorelife.com, and I look forward to your questions and being able to answer them through this program. So feel free to send in your questions via email, send me a text message. You got my number there at the bottom of the screen. You can send a message to me through my website if you fill out one of our contact forms, and we'd be more than happy to answer your questions and to make sure that you find the solution that you need. I will also have information available for Heather as well as Liz, who are resources that I refer my clients to, because I know the benefit of being able to have the support that we need going through these grievous times. Because whether someone has lost a loved one through COVID or not, there has been so much trauma in terms of the loss that we have had materially, emotionally, physically, and then even mentally, with the fear of COVID. That's been a lot of anxiety for many people. So we want to be able to know where our resources are for our community, those who are concerned about our quality of life, and making sure that we get the best that we absolutely deserve. So thank you so much again for joining us here on Mindful Money Moments. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Mhm.
See you later.
Sure. Bye-bye.